The courtroom smelled of old wood and stale coffee. Marcus Reid stood at the defense table, hands trembling at his sides. His royal blue button-down shirt clung to his back with sweat. Judge William Harlan adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. The sound cut through the silence like a blade. "Marcus Reid, you have been found guilty of armed robbery and assault with a deadly weapon." Marcus's public defender, a tired woman named Sandra Mills, touched his arm. Her hand felt cold. The jury wouldn't meet his eyes. "Given the severity of this crime and your refusal to show remorse," Judge Harlan continued, his voice flat and rehearsed, "this court sentences you to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole." The word hung in the air. Life. Marcus's grandmother screamed from the gallery. The bailiffs moved toward her. Someone gasped. The prosecutor smiled slightly, organizing his papers with satisfaction. Judge Harlan's mouth curved upward for just a moment before returning to practice neutrality. Marcus felt his knees buckle. Sandra grabbed his elbow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." He was 17 years old. Life meant dying in a cage for a crime he didn't commit. Bailiffs take the defendant into custody. Harlan's gavel came down like a gunshot. "We're adjourned." Metal cuffs clicked around Marcus's wrists. The weight of them felt like drowning. He found his voice cracked and desperate. "My phone call." "I get a phone call." Judge Harlan paused at his chamber door. Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or contempt. "One call, Mr. Reid. Make it count." The courtroom doors swung shut behind the judge. Marcus breathed through his nose, fighting panic. One call. Only one. He knew exactly who to dial. 3 months earlier, Marcus Reid was invisible in the best possible way. He moved through Roosevelt High School like a shadow, quiet, focused, unnoticed. His emerald green backpack held calculus textbooks, circuit boards, and a worn copy of The Souls of Black Folk. He lived with his grandmother, Ruth, in a narrow townhouse in southeast D.C. The neighborhood was a patchwork of boarded windows and hopeful community gardens. Ruth worked double shifts at Georgetown Hospital, but her kitchen always smelled like cornbread and collard greens on Sundays. Marcus's mornings followed a rhythm. Coffee with Ruth at 6, chess puzzles on the bus, robotics club after school. His teammates called him the Professor because he solved problems in his head before writing them down. He'd smile and say nothing. Attention was dangerous. His father lived somewhere else, everywhere else. Jonathan Reid traveled constantly for work, sent money religiously, called on birthdays. Marcus understood. Important men had important responsibilities. He'd learned not to need him. On weekends, Marcus volunteered at the rec center, teaching younger kids basic coding. A boy named Deshaun, maybe 10 years old, had looked up at him once and asked, "You going to be famous?" Marcus had laughed. "I'm going to be an engineer. Build things that help people." "That's cool," Deshaun had said. "My brother's in prison. Maybe you could build something to get him out." The words had stuck with Marcus. He didn't have an answer then. His bedroom walls were covered with MIT posters and circuit diagrams. A single photo sat on his desk. His mother, young and laughing, holding baby Marcus in a cream-colored dress. She'd died when he was 8. Cancer, swift and merciless. His father had disappeared into work after that. Marcus had Ruth. She was enough. She had to be. That Tuesday evening, Marcus stayed late debugging code for the robotics competition. The lab was empty, humming with computer fans. He texted Ruth, "Home by 9, love you." He grabbed his emerald green backpack and headed for the bus stop. The October air was crisp. Leaves crunched under his sneakers. He had calculus homework and a scholarship essay due Friday. Normal things. Safe things. He didn't know he'd never make it home. Not that version of himself. The sirens came from nowhere. Marcus was 2 blocks from his bus stop when the police cruisers screeched to both sides of the street, boxing him in. Red and blue lights carved up the darkness. "Hands up. Don't move!" A white officer burst from the nearest car, gun drawn. His nameplate read Corso, Marcus's backpack slipped from his shoulder. His hand shot toward the sky, fingers spread. I didn't... What's happening? 3 more officers emerged, surrounding him. Corso approached slowly, weapon trained on Marcus's chest. A convenience store was just robbed 3 blocks from here. Clerk got pistol whipped. You match the description. What description? Marcus's voice cracked. I was at school. I haven't done anything. Young black male, dark hoodie, about 6 feet. Corso's eyes were cold, scanning Marcus like he was already guilty. That's you. That's half the neighborhood. Marcus kept his hands up, heart hammering. I have my student ID. Call my school. I was in the robotics lab until 15 minutes ago. Corso holstered his weapon and grabbed Marcus's wrist, twisting it behind his back. The metal cuffs bit into skin. You have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. I didn't rob anyone. Marcus's voice rose, panic flooding through him. Please, just check. Call Roosevelt High. My teacher can confirm. Save it for downtown. Corso shoved him toward the cruiser. Marcus's grandmother's number flashed through his mind, but his phone was in his backpack, now on the sidewalk. At the station, the interrogation room was small and windowless. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. Corso sat across from him, arms folded. Another detective, a black woman named Hayes, stood in the corner. Tell us where you were at 8:47 p.m. Corso began. Walking to the bus stop from Roosevelt High, I left the robotics lab around 8:30. Marcus's voice was steady, despite the fear coursing through him. My teacher, Mr. Patterson, can verify. So can the security cameras. Corso smirked. Convenient. You got anyone who actually saw you? Witnesses? The lab was empty. I was working alone. Marcus swallowed hard. But my phone, check my location data. It'll show I was at school. We'll look into it. Corso leaned forward. Here's what I think happened. You needed money. Robbed the store. Clerk fought back. You panicked and hit him. Then you ran. No. Marcus shook his head. That's not... I would never... You're being charged with armed robbery and aggravated assault. Corso stood, satisfied. Clerk ID'd you from a photo lineup 20 minutes ago. Said he's sure it was you. The room tilted. Marcus felt the walls closing in. He's wrong. He's lying, please. But Corso was already at the door. Hayes followed without a word. The lock clicked behind them. Marcus sat alone in the buzzing silence, handcuffed to the table. 17 years old and charged with crimes he didn't commit. The system was supposed to work. His father always said it worked. It was supposed to work. The juvenile detention center smelled like disinfectant and desperation. Marcus lay on a thin mattress in a cell barely wider than his arm span. The fluorescent lights never fully turned off, just dimmed to a sickly yellow that made sleep impossible. 4 days had passed. Or maybe 5. Time moved differently here. His grandmother had visited once, crying so hard she couldn't speak. She'd pressed her palm against the plexiglass barrier. Marcus had matched her hand with his, separated by inches that felt like miles. She'd whispered, I called him. Your father. He's in Brussels. He's coming. But Jonathan Reid hadn't called. Hadn't come. Brussels was far away and his work was important. Marcus understood. He always understood. Sandra Mills, his court-appointed public defender, had visited twice. She'd arrived with an overstuffed briefcase and an apologetic expression. Your phone records are delayed. The store's surveillance footage is corrupted. The witness is credible. I'm working on it, Marcus. I promise. But her eyes said what her mouth wouldn't. You're already convicted. Marcus replayed the arrest in his mind on an endless loop. The red and blue lights, Corso's satisfied smirk, the metal cuffs. The clerk who'd identified him from a photo lineup without hesitation. A stranger's certainty destroying his entire life. He'd told them about the robotics competition, about MIT, about his scholarship essays. They'd listened with glazed eyes and nodded politely. None of it mattered. He was a young black male in a dark hoodie. The description was enough. The other boys in detention watched him with something between pity and contempt. They'd heard his story. Innocent was a currency no one accepted here. Marcus kept to himself, ate alone, spoke only when necessary. At night, when the facility finally quieted, he'd close his eyes and remember his mother's voice. She used to sing while cooking, her cream-colored apron dusted with flour. "You're stronger than you know, baby," she'd say when he'd struggled with homework or bullies. "Strength isn't about fighting. It's about standing. But how do you stand when the ground keeps shifting beneath you? How do you fight a system designed to erase you?" Marcus didn't call his father. Pride, maybe, or fear. Jonathan Reid had built his career on believing in justice, in the rule of law. What would he think of his son, arrested and charged and helpless? Marcus kept his one phone call in reserve, waiting, hoping he wouldn't need it, hoping the system would correct itself. It was supposed to work. Marcus had Googled his father once when he was 12, sitting in the school library after hours. The search results had stunned him. Jonathan Reid named U.S. Attorney General. Reid vows to reform criminal justice, from public defender to nation's top prosecutor. He'd clicked through photos of his father in sharp suits, shaking hands with senators, standing at podiums flanked by American flags. The man in those images felt like a stranger, powerful, unreachable, important. Jonathan Reid's story was the kind that inspired movies. Born in Atlanta, to a single mother who cleaned offices at night, he'd earned a scholarship to Howard University, then Harvard Law. He'd started as a public defender in Chicago, fighting for people who couldn't afford justice. Marcus remembered fragments of those years. A cramped apartment in Hyde Park, his father's law books stacked like towers. Late nights when Jonathan would come home exhausted but smiling, ruffling Marcus's hair and saying, "1-1 today, kiddo." Kept a good man out of prison. Then Marcus's mother got sick, 3 months from diagnosis to funeral. Jonathan had held Marcus at the graveside, both of them silent while rain soaked through their black suits. Ruth had moved in the next week. Jonathan had changed after that. He'd taken a job with the Justice Department, climbing ranks quickly. Prosecutor, deputy, bureau chief. Each promotion meant more travel, longer absences, shorter phone calls. Marcus understood. His father was healing the only way he knew how, by fighting. "The system works if you trust it," Jonathan had told him during one rare visit home. Marcus was 14, frustrated after a teacher had accused him of cheating on an exam he'd aced. When injustice happens, you document it, you report it, you let the process unfold. "That's how we fix things," Marcus had believed him then. His father was proof, a black man from nothing, now the nation's top law enforcement official. The system had worked for Jonathan Reid. It would work for everyone else, too. Ruth had a different view. "Your daddy's brilliant, baby," she'd said once, folding laundry in the kitchen. But he forgets. The system worked for him because he's exceptional. For the rest of us, it's a lottery. Some days you win, most days you don't. Marcus had dismissed her cynicism. He'd inherited his father's optimism, his belief in institutions and processes. He'd studied hard, stayed out of trouble, followed every rule. Good grades would lead to good colleges, would lead to a good life. The formula was simple. Sitting in juvenile detention, those conversations haunted him. His father's voice, "Trust the system." Ruth's voice, "It's a lottery." And his mother's voice, faint but persistent, "You're stronger than you know." He hadn't told his father about the robotics competition he'd won last year. Hadn't mentioned the MIT recruiter who'd praised his design for a low-cost water filtration system. Hadn't shared that teachers called him gifted, that Deshawn looked up to him, that he had a future. None of it mattered now. The system his father believed in had chewed Marcus up in 4 days. No phone records, no surveillance footage, no presumption of innocence, just a young black male in a dark hoodie. Guilty until proven, no, just guilty. The trial would be a formality. Marcus finally understood what his father had been fighting for all these years. He'd been trying to fix a machine that ground up people like Marcus every single day, but Jonathan Reid wasn't here. And Marcus was running out of time. Sandra Mills arrived on a Thursday afternoon, with papers spilling from her briefcase and exhaustion carved into her face. She sat across from Marcus in the narrow visitation room, separated by scratched plexiglass. "I need to be honest with you," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're being railroaded." Marcus's stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Sandra pulled out a folder, hands shaking slightly. "Detective Corso, I did some digging. He's got a pattern. Over the past 3 years, he's made 47 arrests in predominantly black neighborhoods. 32 resulted in convictions, but 11 of those have been overturned on appeal due to coerced witnesses or misidentified suspects. So he's done this before." Marcus's voice was hollow, repeatedly. "And he's never faced consequences because the convictions stick long enough to pad his stats." Sandra flipped through pages. "The witness who identified you, Thomas Chen, the store clerk. He was shown a photo lineup 3 hours after the incident. Standard procedure is 6 hours minimum to avoid shock-induced false identification." Corso rushed it. Marcus leaned forward. "Can we use that?" "I tried." The prosecutor shut it down. "Said the timeline doesn't invalidate the ID." Sandra's jaw tightened. "The prosecutor is Elizabeth Warren. No different Elizabeth, local. She's running for DA next year. She needs conviction rates. High-profile cases. A scholarship kid turned armed robber plays well in her campaign ads." The room felt smaller. Marcus's breath came short. "The surveillance footage from the store. They said it was corrupted. Convenient, right?" Sandra's expression was grim. "I filed a motion to have an independent tech expert examine it. The judge, Judge Harlan, denied it. Said the police department's analysis was sufficient. Why would a judge do that?" Sandra hesitated, then lowered her voice further. "Harlan's up for re-election. Warren's been his biggest campaign donor. They golfed together. I can't prove collusion, but the conflicts are everywhere." Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and unfamiliar. "So what do we do?" "We go to trial. I'll argue reasonable doubt. Your clean record, your character witnesses. Your teacher from Roosevelt confirmed you were in the lab until 8:30. The bus route surveillance shows you walking toward the stop at 8:42. That's a 5-minute gap before the robbery occurred at 8:47. 5 minutes is enough time to rob a store?" Marcus's voice cracked. "According to Warren, yes. She'll argue you ran 3 blocks, committed the robbery, then ran back toward your normal route to establish an alibi." Sandra rubbed her temples. "It's thin, but juries convict on thinner. What about my phone location data?" Still delayed. "The carrier is citing technical issues." "It'll be weeks before we get it." Sandra met his eyes. "Marcus, I need you to prepare for the worst. Even if we get the data, even if it exonerates you, we're up against a system that's already decided. Corso wants the arrest. Warren wants the conviction. Harlan wants his re-election. And I'm just collateral damage." The words tasted bitter. Sandra's eyes glistened. "I'm sorry. I became a public defender because I believed in this. In fighting for people who couldn't fight for themselves. But I'm one person with 200 active cases and a system designed to churn through people like an assembly line. I'll do everything I can, Marcus. But you need to know the odds are against us." Marcus sat back, the cheap plastic chair creaking beneath him. His father's voice echoed, "The system works if you trust it." But the system was a judge who played golf with prosecutors, a detective who framed innocence, a witness coerced by shock and suggestion. The system was working exactly as designed, just not for people who looked like Marcus. "What happens if I'm convicted?" he asked quietly. Sandra's silence was answer enough. Then finally, mandatory minimum for armed robbery with assault is 20 years. Given your age, they'll try you as an adult. With Harlan's reputation for harsh sentencing, she trailed off. Marcus thought of Ruth, her hands pressed against plexiglass. Of his father in Brussels, fighting for justice thousands of miles away. Of Deshawn asking if he could build something to free his brother. Maybe that's what this was. A test. An education in how the machine really worked. When's the trial? Marcus asked. 3 weeks. They're fast-tracking it. Sandra began gathering her papers. Warren wants this closed before the campaign heats up. 3 weeks until his life ended. Marcus nodded slowly. Okay, let's fight. Sandra managed a sad smile. That's the spirit. I'll see you at arraignment tomorrow. She left and Marcus was escorted back to his cell. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless song. He lay on the thin mattress and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the concrete. Somewhere his father was probably giving a speech about justice, about reform, about believing in institutions. Marcus had believed too. Right up until the moment those institutions swallowed him whole. The trial lasted 3 days. The courtroom was a theater, and Marcus was both audience and accused. He sat at the defense table in a borrowed navy suit that hung loose on his frame, watching his life dissected by strangers. Detective Corso testified first, confident and unshakable. He described the arrest with clinical precision, time, location, probable cause. Under Sandra's cross-examination, he admitted he couldn't recall specific details about Marcus's appearance that night, just that he matched the description. And what description was that, detective? Sandra pressed. Young black male, dark clothing, approximately 6 feet tall. Corso's tone suggested this was obvious. The suspect matched those parameters. So would dozens of young men in that neighborhood, wouldn't you say? Objection. Prosecutor Warren stood smoothly. Speculative. Sustained. Judge Harlan didn't even look up. Thomas Chen, the store clerk, took the stand next. He was nervous, hands fidgeting with his tie. He pointed at Marcus. That's him. I'm sure. Sandra approached the witness box gently. Mr. Chen, you were struck in the head during the robbery, correct? Yes. You received 7 stitches and were diagnosed with a mild concussion? Yes. And Detective Corso showed you a photo lineup just 3 hours after this traumatic event? Chen hesitated. Yes, he said it was important to identify the suspect quickly. Were you still in pain? Disoriented? A little, but I knew what I saw. Chen's voice gained strength, probably coached by Warren. I looked him in the eyes. It was him. Sandra tried for an hour to shake his certainty. It held firm, solid as concrete. The jury watched Marcus, their expressions unreadable. On the second day, Marcus testified. Sandra had prepared him. Speak clearly, make eye contact, tell the truth. He described his evening step by step. Robotics lab, homework, the walk to the bus stop. He explained his dreams of MIT, his scholarship applications, his volunteer work. Why would I throw my future away for a convenience store robbery? Marcus asked the jury. I had everything to lose and nothing to gain. But Warren's cross-examination was surgical. You live in a low-income neighborhood, correct, Mr. Reid? Yes. Your grandmother works 2 jobs to support you. She doesn't have to. My father... Marcus stopped himself. Warren pounced. Your father? Where is he, Mr. Reid? He travels for work. So he's absent. Warren's smile was sharp. And you're raised by an elderly woman struggling to make ends meet. Doesn't that create financial pressure? No, we're fine. Are you? Because according to your bank records, you have $83 in your account. Warren held up documents. That's not fine for a young man with college aspirations, Sandra objected repeatedly. Harlan overruled her each time. The jury shifted in their seats. Warren painted Marcus as a desperate student, a promising kid corrupted by circumstance. She highlighted the 5-minute gap in his timeline. She called it more than enough time to commit this heinous act. Marcus felt the room turning against him. Their eyes went from sympathetic to skeptical to cold. He was no longer a person. He was a statistic, a headline, a cautionary tale. On the 3rd day, Sandra delivered her closing argument with passion. She dismantled Corso's pattern of misconduct. She questioned Chen's certainty despite head trauma. She reminded the jury of reasonable doubt. Marcus Reid is a child, Sandra said, voice breaking slightly. A straight-A student who dreams of changing the world through engineering. The state has shown you a description, a rushed identification, and a convenient timeline. They haven't shown you proof. They haven't eliminated doubt. Don't let them destroy an innocent life, because it's easier than admitting they arrested the wrong person. Warren's closing was brief and devastating. The defense wants you to ignore the evidence, because Marcus Reid seems like a nice kid. But nice kids commit crimes every day. The witness identified him. The detective arrested him at the scene. The timeline fits. Justice demands accountability. Give Thomas Chen, a hard-working immigrant who was brutalized in his own store, the justice he deserves. Convict Marcus Reid. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, none of them looked at Marcus. That's when he knew. We find the defendant guilty on all charges. Ruth's wail cut through the courtroom. Sandra gripped Marcus's hand. Prosecutor Warren nodded with satisfaction. Judge Harlan scheduled sentencing for the following week. Marcus had testified. He'd told the truth. He'd trusted the process, and the process had chewed him up anyway. In his cell that night, he finally let himself cry. Silent, shoulders shaking, face buried in the thin pillow. His father's words felt like lies now. The system didn't work. It was a machine designed to grind up people who couldn't afford to fight back. But Marcus had one more move. One last card. He'd saved it, hoping he wouldn't need it. Hoping justice would prevail on its own. It hadn't. So now he'd play the only hand he had left. Sentencing day arrived cold and grey. The courtroom was less crowded this time. Just Ruth in the gallery, Sandra at the defense table, Warren organizing papers with satisfaction. Judge Harlan entered, black robes swishing, expression already set. Marcus wore the same borrowed navy suit. It felt like a costume now. He'd barely slept in 6 nights. The conviction kept replaying in his mind. The jury foreman's voice flat and final. Guilty, Mr. Reid, please rise. Harlan's voice carried no warmth. Marcus stood, legs unsteady. Sandra rose beside him. Marcus Reid, you have been found guilty by a jury of your peers of armed robbery and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Harlan adjusted his glasses, scanning a prepared statement. This court has reviewed the sentencing guidelines and considered the severity of your crimes. Ruth whispered something that sounded like a prayer. Marcus kept his eyes forward. Despite your age and clean prior record, the violence inflicted upon Mr. Chen cannot be overlooked. Harlan's tone was almost bored, as if sentencing a child to decades in prison was routine paperwork. This court must send a clear message that such criminal behavior will not be tolerated, regardless of the defendant's background or potential. Marcus felt Sandra stiffen beside him. This was it, the moment his life ended. Therefore, it is the judgment of this court that Marcus Reid be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Life. The syllable echoed in Marcus's skull. Ruth screamed, a sound of pure anguish. Bailiffs moved toward her. Someone in the gallery gasped. Warren smiled slightly, closing her leather portfolio. A life sentence would look excellent in her campaign materials. Judge Harlan's mouth curved upward for the briefest moment. Satisfaction, victory, something ugly Marcus couldn't name. Then the professional mask returned. Bailiffs, take the defendant into custody. This court is adjourned. The gavel fell. Sandra grabbed Marcus's arm as bailiffs approached with handcuffs. I'll file an appeal immediately. This is excessive. This is wrong, I know. Marcus's voice was surprisingly steady. The shock was like Novocaine, numbing everything. Thank you, Sandra. For trying. The cuffs clicked around his wrists. Cold metal, familiar now. The bailiffs guided him toward the side door. Ruth was being restrained by another officer, crying so hard she couldn't breathe. Wait. Marcus stopped, turning back toward the bench. Your Honor, I'm entitled to a phone call. Harlan paused at his chamber door. The judge's eyes flickered with something. Amusement, perhaps. Or contempt for this kid still clinging to rights that meant nothing. A phone call. How quaint. It's my right, Marcus said firmly. Warren looked up from her papers, curious. Sandra frowned, confused. Harlan sighed, checking his watch like this was an inconvenience. Fine, one call, Mr. Reid. The judge's smile was condescending. Make it count. Perhaps your absent father will finally answer. The words were meant to wound, they did. But Marcus had been wounded so many times in the past weeks that one more cut barely registered. Thank you, Your Honor. Marcus kept his voice level, swallowing rage and fear and grief. One call, the only move left on the board. The bailiffs led him to a small room with a single phone mounted on the wall. No privacy, no comfort. Just a receiver and a dial pad and one last chance. Marcus lifted the phone with shaking hands. He'd memorized the number years ago, even though he'd never called it. Never needed it. Never wanted to admit he needed his father. The line rang once, twice, 3 times. Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. What if Jonathan didn't answer? What if he was in a meeting, on a plane, unreachable? 4 rings, 5. Then a voice crisp and professional. Office of the Attorney General, how may I direct your call? Marcus's throat closed. He forced words through. This is Marcus Reid. I'm Jonathan Reid's son. I need to speak with him immediately. Tell him, his voice cracked. Tell him I've been sentenced to life in prison. And I didn't do it. Silence on the other end. Then urgent, hold please. Don't hang up. The line went to hold music, something classical, absurdly peaceful. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cold wall. The bailiffs watched him with pity mixed with impatience. Seconds stretched into minutes. The hold music played on. Marcus's grip on the receiver tightened until his knuckles went white. Finally a click. A different voice, sharp and controlled. This is Angela Torres, Chief of Staff. Marcus? Yes. Your father is in a classified briefing. I'm pulling him out now. Stay on the line. Her tone was urgent, almost frightened. Do not hang up that phone. More silence. Marcus could hear his own breathing, ragged and too fast. Somewhere beyond the room, the courthouse continued its daily machinery. Other cases. Other lives destroyed or saved by the turn of a gavel. Then his father's voice, breathless and raw, with something Marcus had never heard before. Fear. Marcus. Son, what happened? Angela said you were sentenced. That can't be right. Tell me what happened. Marcus opened his mouth. For a moment, nothing came out. 17 years of distance and absence and trying not to need his father too much, all rushed up at once. Dad, he whispered, I need you. They sent me to prison for life, and I didn't do anything wrong. The silence on the other end lasted 3 heartbeats. When Jonathan Reid spoke again, his voice was steel wrapped in ice. Don't say another word to anyone. Not one word. I'm coming. Do you understand me? I am coming, and this ends now. The line went dead. Marcus stood holding the receiver, tears streaming down his face. He'd played his last card. His father was coming. The U.S. Attorney General was coming. But would it be enough? Could anyone stop a machine that had already rendered its verdict? Marcus didn't know. He only knew he'd run out of moves, out of time, out of hope. The bailiffs led him back toward the holding cells. Behind them the courtroom emptied. Judge Harlan returned to his chambers. Prosecutor Warren headed to her next case. Sandra gathered her papers with tears in her eyes. And somewhere, thousands of miles away, the most powerful prosecutor in America dropped everything and began to move. Marcus sat in the holding cell, knees drawn to his chest, back against cold concrete. The phone call had been 18 hours ago. No word since. No message. No rescue. Maybe his father couldn't help. Maybe the Attorney General's power stopped at courtroom doors already closed. Maybe Marcus had wasted his one call on a man too far away. Too busy, too late. The other inmates had heard about his sentence. Life at 17. They gave him space now, treating him like something contagious. Even hardened men looked away from that kind of injustice. It was too raw, too real. Ruth hadn't returned. The bailiffs had told him she'd collapsed in the courthouse lobby, had to be taken to the hospital. Stress-induced chest pains. Marcus added that to his list of destructions. His future, his grandmother's health, his father's faith in the system he'd served. The fluorescent lights hummed their endless drone. Marcus counted ceiling tiles for the 100th time. 42 across, 38 down. 1,596 squares of stained acoustic panels. He'd memorized every water stain, every crack. This was his life now. Counting tiles in progressively smaller cages until he died. The public defender had filed an appeal, but appeals took years. Marcus would be transferred to adult prison within weeks. He'd heard stories. What happened to young, slight kids in those places. The violence. The gangs. The survival mechanisms that hollowed you out from the inside. He thought about his mother. Wondered if she was watching from wherever people went. Wondered if she was disappointed or heartbroken or angry at the world that had swallowed her son. "You're stronger than you know," she'd said, but strength had limits. Marcus felt his running out. A sound echoed down the corridor. Boots, multiple pairs, moving fast. Voices urgent and official. Marcus didn't look up. Probably transferring someone. Probably nothing to do with him. The footsteps stopped at his cell. Keys jangled. Marcus glanced up slowly. 3 federal marshals stood outside his door, faces unreadable. Behind them, a woman in a sharp grey suit held a tablet. She met Marcus's eyes with something like sympathy. Marcus Reid. Her voice was steady, professional. "Yes, I'm Angela Torres, Chief of Staff to Attorney General Jonathan Reid." She nodded to the marshals. They unlocked his cell. "You're coming with us." Marcus stood on shaking legs. "Where?" "Somewhere safe." Angela stepped aside as the marshals entered. "Your father is 20 minutes out. He wanted you secured first." One marshal removed Marcus's handcuffs. Another handed him a bottle of water. The kindness felt foreign after weeks of casual cruelty. "Is my grandmother—" "She's stable," Angela said quickly. "Discharged this morning. She's waiting for you." Marcus followed them through corridors he'd walked a dozen times in chains. But now the guards stepped aside. Doors opened without question. People stared but said nothing. Outside, 3 black SUVs idled at the curb. Federal vehicles. Marcus was guided into the middle one. Angela sat beside him, tapping on her tablet. The motorcade pulled away from the courthouse. Sirens silent but lights flashing. Marcus watched the building disappear behind them. The place where his life had been dismantled piece by piece. Where Judge Harlan had smiled while sentencing a child to die in prison. "What happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. Angela looked at him, and her professional mask cracked slightly. "Now? Your father burns this entire system to the ground." The federal building conference room was all glass and steel, overlooking D.C.'s morning traffic. Marcus sat at a polished table, Ruth beside him gripping his hand. She looked smaller somehow, aged by trauma, but her eyes were fierce. The door opened. Jonathan Reid entered like a storm front. Marcus hadn't seen his father in person for 8 months. Video calls didn't capture the man's presence. The way he filled a room commanded attention without speaking. Jonathan was tall, silver threading through his hair, wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than Ruth's monthly rent. But his eyes, when they found Marcus, held nothing but raw anguish. "Marcus!" His father's voice broke on the name. He crossed the room in 3 strides, pulling Marcus into an embrace that felt like drowning and breathing at the same time. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry I wasn't there sooner." Marcus buried his face in his father's shoulder, years of careful distance crumbling. "They said I did it, Dad. Everyone believed them." "I know," Jonathan held him tighter. "I know, son. That ends today." When they finally separated, Jonathan turned to Ruth. He hugged her too, whispering something Marcus couldn't hear. She nodded, wiping tears. Jonathan moved to the head of the table, and the professional mask snapped into place. This was the Attorney General now, the man who'd prosecuted senators and dismantled cartels. Angela took a seat beside him, tablet ready. 18 hours ago, I learned my son was convicted and sentenced to life in prison for a crime he didn't commit. Jonathan's voice was ice and steel. I've spent those 18 hours reviewing every document, every transcript, every piece of evidence. What I found is systematic corruption at every level. He pulled up a presentation on the wall screen. Detective Corso's face appeared. Arrest records, case histories, patterns of misconduct. Detective Michael Corso has a documented history of coercing witnesses and misidentifying suspects, primarily in black communities. 11 of his convictions have been overturned on appeal. He's never faced disciplinary action because prosecutors need his arrest numbers. The next slide showed prosecutor Elizabeth Warren's campaign materials. Elizabeth Warren is running for district attorney. She needed high-profile convictions to boost her law and order credentials. Marcus's case, a scholarship student turned criminal, was perfect for her narrative. Judge Harlan appeared next alongside financial records. Judge William Harlan received $47,000 in campaign donations from Warren's Political Action Committee over the past year. They have a documented personal relationship. Harlan fast-tracked Marcus's trial, denied every defense motion, and delivered a sentence so excessive it borders on sadistic. Marcus watched his father dismantle the machinery that had destroyed him. Each slide was a nail in someone's coffin. The surveillance footage from the convenience store was never corrupted. Jonathan's jaw tightened. It was deliberately withheld. We recovered it from the city's backup servers 2 hours ago. The screen changed. Grainy security footage played. The convenience store interior. Timestamp reading 8:47 p.m. A figure entered wearing a dark hoodie and mask. Average height, thin build. The robbery lasted 90 seconds. The figure fled east. This isn't my son, Jonathan said quietly. Marcus is 6'1", athletic build. This suspect is 5'9" at most, significantly lighter. The witness, Thomas Chen, was shown a doctored photo lineup where Marcus's picture was the only one matching the general description. Angela spoke up. We've also obtained Marcus's phone location data. At 8:47 p.m., his device was stationary at the Roosevelt High School robotics lab, where he'd been working for 2 hours. The cell tower triangulation is irrefutable. The witness recounted? Ruth asked, voice shaking. Better. Jonathan's smile was grim. Thomas Chen agreed to speak with FBI agents this morning. He admitted Detective Corso pressured him to identify Marcus, claiming they needed to get this criminal off the streets before he hurt someone else. Chen was traumatized, disoriented, and trusted police authority. He's devastated. Marcus felt something crack open in his chest. Not quite hope, but its precursor. Possibility. What about the judge and prosecutor? He asked. Federal investigation into judicial corruption and prosecutorial misconduct. Jonathan's voice carried absolute certainty. I've assigned a team of attorneys. Harlan's financial records, Warren's case history, Corso's pattern of abuse. Everything is under review. They won't practice law again when this is finished. Angela added, We've also filed an emergency motion to vacate Marcus's conviction. Federal court, not state. The hearing is scheduled for 2 hours from now, 2 hours. Marcus tried to process it. 18 hours ago, he'd been sentenced to die in prison. Now his father had mobilized the entire federal justice system. Why didn't you tell me? Jonathan asked suddenly, his controlled facade cracking. Why didn't you call me when you were arrested? Why wait until sentencing? Marcus looked down. You were in Brussels, fighting for people who needed you. I didn't want to be another case. Another problem? You're my son, Jonathan's voice broke. You're not a case. You're not a problem. You're everything. Ruth squeezed Marcus's hand. He thought the system would work, Jonathan, because you taught him to believe in it. Jonathan closed his eyes. When he opened them, they glistened. I taught you wrong, Marcus. The system doesn't work automatically. It works when people with power force it to work. when they fight for it. I should have taught you that. I should have been there. You're here now, Marcus whispered. Yes. Jonathan straightened, the Attorney General returning. And I'm going to make sure everyone involved understands something fundamental. Justice doesn't care about your politics, or your career, or your prejudices. It only cares about truth. And the truth is going to destroy them. Angela checked her watch. Sir, we need to leave for court in 30 minutes. Jonathan nodded. He turned to Marcus. This hearing will be quick. The evidence is overwhelming, but I need you to be ready. There will be cameras, reporters, questions. Your case is going to become national news. Because my father is the Attorney General, Marcus said quietly. No. Jonathan's voice was firm. Because what happened to you happens to thousands of kids every year who don't have powerful parents. This isn't about me protecting my son, though I will ferociously. This is about exposing a system that grinds up innocent people for political points and career advancement. Your case is the proof we've needed. Marcus understood then. His nightmare had a purpose. His suffering would become a weapon against the machine that created it. I'm ready, he said. The federal courthouse was chaos. News vans lined the street, reporters shouting questions. Federal marshals formed a protective corridor as Marcus walked between his father and Ruth. Cameras flashed like lightning. Someone yelled, "Is it true you're innocent?" Marcus kept his head up, silent. Judge Patricia Morrison's courtroom was packed. At the front table sat Sandra Mills, looking shell-shocked and grateful. Behind them, Ruth settled into the gallery. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Warren sat rigid, flanked by 2 attorneys. Detective Corso stood against the back wall, arms crossed defensively. Judge Harlan sat in the second row, face carved from stone. Judge Morrison was a black woman in her 60s, appointed by the previous administration, known for her sharp intellect and zero tolerance for misconduct. She took a seat, surveyed the room, and spoke with quiet authority. This is an emergency hearing on federal motion to vacate the state. Conviction of Marcus Reid. The United States Attorney General has invoked federal jurisdiction, citing systematic civil rights violations. Mr. Reid, Attorney General Reid, please approach. Jonathan stood. Marcus rose beside him, heart hammering. They walked to the podium together. His father's presence was solid as granite. Your Honor, Jonathan began, my office has uncovered evidence of deliberate misconduct, suppressed exculpatory evidence, and constitutional violations in Marcus Reid's arrest, trial, and sentencing. We have video footage, phone records, and witness testimony that irrefutably prove my son's innocence. Furthermore, we have documented a pattern of corruption involving the detective, prosecutor, and presiding judge. Morrison's expression remained neutral. That's a serious allegation, General Reid. I assume you have substantial proof. I do, Your Honor. Jonathan nodded to Angela, who cued the presentation. I'll be brief. The evidence speaks for itself. The first video played the convenience store robbery footage. The courtroom went silent, everyone leaning forward. The masked figure was clearly not Marcus. Different build, different height, different gait. This footage was recovered from city backup servers yesterday, Jonathan explained. It was never corrupted. It was deliberately withheld from the defense because it exonerates Marcus Reid. Prosecutor Warren stood. Your Honor, the state was informed by local police that the footage was— Sit down, Ms. Warren. Morrison's voice cut like a scalpel. You'll have your chance to respond. Continue, General Reid. Jonathan pulled up Marcus's phone records. Cell tower data proves Marcus's phone was stationary at Roosevelt High School from 6:15 p.m. to 8:54 p.m. on the night in question. The robbery occurred at 8:47 p.m., 3 miles away. There is no physical possibility he committed this crime. The screen split, showing the school and store locations simultaneously. The distance, the timeline, the impossibility of it all laid bare. The witness identification, Jonathan continued, voice hardening, was obtained through coercive tactics. Detective Corso showed Thomas Chen a photo lineup 3 hours after a traumatic head injury, rushing the identification process. Mr. Chen has since recanted, admitting he was pressured and uncertain. A video deposition played. Thomas Chen, bandages still visible, spoke to FBI agents. "I wasn't sure. I told Detective Corso I wasn't sure, but he kept saying, 'This is the guy who hurt you. You need to identify him so we can keep the community safe.' I was scared and in pain. I just wanted to help." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Morrison's gavel came down once. Silence returned. "Detective Corso has a pattern," Jonathan said, pulling up arrest records. 47 arrests in 3 years. 32 convictions. 11 overturned on appeal. Every single one involving black defendants, coerced witnesses, and withheld evidence. He has never faced disciplinary action. Corso shifted uncomfortably against the wall. Several reporters were furiously typing. Jonathan turned toward Warren. Prosecutor Elizabeth Warren is currently running for district attorney on a tough-on-crime platform. Marcus Reid's case, a scholarship student turned violent criminal, was featured prominently in her campaign materials before the trial even concluded. She needed a conviction for political gain. Warren's face flushed red. "Your Honor, this is character assassination." "It's public record, Ms. Warren." Morrison's tone was frigid. "Sit down." Jonathan's final slide appeared, Judge Harlan's financial disclosures. Judge William Harlan received $47,000 in campaign contributions from Prosecutor Warren's passee. He denied every defense motion, fast-tracked the trial, and delivered a sentence of life in prison without parole to a 17-year-old first-time offender with no criminal history. The statutory minimum was 5 years. Life is not justice. It's vengeance. Morrison looked directly at Harlan in the gallery. The former judge stared back, defiant but visibly sweating. These 3 individuals, Corso, Warren and Harlan, conspired, whether explicitly or through willful negligence, to convict an innocent child. Jonathan's voice rose, controlled fury bleeding through. They did it for career advancement, for statistics, for campaign advertisements. They destroyed a life because it was convenient, because no one was watching, because they thought they could. He turned to face his son. "Marcus Reid is brilliant. He's kind. He volunteers teaching children to code. He dreams of building water filtration systems for communities without clean water. He had a 4.2 GPA and multiple scholarship offers, and in 4 weeks this system nearly buried him alive." Marcus felt tears sliding down his face. His father's voice carried not just legal argument, but parental anguish. The system failed Marcus because systems are built and operated by people, and people are corruptible. Jonathan faced Morrison again. "But justice, real justice, demands we expose that corruption and burn it out root and branch. I'm asking this court to vacate Marcus Reid's conviction, expunge his record, and refer criminal charges against Detective Corso, Prosecutor Warren, and Judge Harlan for civil rights violations, obstruction of justice, and judicial corruption." The courtroom held its breath. Morrison was silent for a long moment, reviewing documents on her bench. Finally, she looked up. "I've reviewed the evidence presented, and I'm honestly appalled." Her voice was quiet but absolute. "The conviction of Marcus Reid is hereby vacated immediately. All charges dismissed with prejudice. They cannot be refiled. Mr. Reid, you are free to go." Marcus's knees buckled. Jonathan caught him, holding him upright. Ruth sobbed openly in the gallery. "Furthermore," Morrison continued, "I am referring this matter to the FBI for full criminal investigation. Detective Corso, Prosecutor Warren, and Judge Harlan, you are ordered to surrender your credentials and not leave the jurisdiction pending investigation. This is a dark day for justice, but perhaps a necessary one." Court is adjourned. The gavel fell. The courtroom exploded. Reporters rushing for doors, people shouting, cameras flashing. Marcus stood in the center of it all, his father's arms around him, finally, impossibly free. Across the room, Detective Corso slipped out the back, face ashen. Warren sat frozen, her political career imploding in real time. Harlan stared at the bench where he'd once presided, everything he'd built crumbling to dust, and Marcus Reid, 17 years old, breathed free air for the first time in weeks. The system hadn't saved him. His father had. But now maybe they could fix the system so the next kid wouldn't need a miracle. The federal building parking garage was quiet compared to the chaos upstairs. Marcus sat in the back of an SUV, Ruth beside him, watching the world through tinted windows. It looked the same as before. Same gray sky, same traffic, same city, but everything had changed. Jonathan slid into the seat across from them, exhaustion finally showing through the armor. He'd spent the past hour fielding calls, coordinating investigations, laying groundwork for prosecutions. Now he was just a father, looking at his son with relief and regret. "What happens next?" Marcus asked quietly. "You go home," Jonathan said. "You sleep, you heal. The rest, the investigations, the trials, that's not your burden anymore." "But it will be public," Marcus said. "My name, my face, everything." "Yes." Jonathan didn't sugarize it. "Your case will become a symbol. There will be interviews, documentaries, legal scholars analyzing every detail. People will want to hear your story. You can say yes or no to all of it. That's your choice." Ruth stroked Marcus's hair. "My baby's finally coming home." Marcus leaned into her touch. Home. The word felt foreign after weeks of cells and courtrooms. "What about school?" "Roosevelt High has already called," Jonathan said. "They want you back. Your robotics team wants you at the competition next month. Kemasingi sent a letter. They're holding your scholarship." It was too much. Too fast. Marcus had prepared for life in prison, for slowly dying behind bars. He hadn't prepared for resurrection. "Detective Corso?" he asked. "Being arrested as we speak," Jonathan replied. FBI found evidence he'd falsified reports in 6 other cases. He's looking at federal charges, possibly decades. Warren withdrew from the DA race an hour ago. Bar Association is reviewing her conduct. "She'll be disbarred." Jonathan's voice was flat, factual. "Harlan is already suspended from the bench. Federal prosecutors are building cases against all 3. Marcus should have felt satisfaction. Instead, he felt hollow. How many others? How many kids like me got buried because they didn't have a father who was Attorney General? Jonathan's expression crumbled. Too many. Thousands, probably. That's what keeps me up at night. Then we fix it. Marcus sat up straighter, clarity cutting through exhaustion. We use what happened to me. We show people how it works, how they manipulate the system, how innocent people get destroyed. We make it impossible to ignore. Jonathan studied his son, something like pride mixing with sorrow. You're sure? It won't be easy. There will be backlash. People who'll say you're lying, that your father pulled strings, that... Let them say it. Marcus's voice was steady. I know what happened. You know what happened. The evidence knows what happened. Everyone else can watch the truth unfold. Ruth smiled through tears. That's my grandson, strong as his mother. Jonathan reached across and gripped Marcus's shoulder. I'm proud of you. Not because you survived this, though that took incredible strength. I'm proud because you still believe in justice, after everything tried to kill that belief. You're better than me. No, Marcus said softly. I just had better teachers. Mom taught me strength. Grandma taught me love. You taught me to believe in something bigger than myself. I taught you wrong, Jonathan said. I told you to trust the system blindly. You taught me the system should work, Marcus corrected, that it can work. That's not wrong, it's aspirational. Now we make the aspiration real. They sat in silence for a moment. 3 generations bound by trauma and love and determination. Outside, the city continued its indifferent rhythm. But inside this car, something had shifted. Marcus Reid had died in that courtroom and been reborn in federal court. He was different now, harder, clearer, purposeful. Let's go home, Ruth said finally. I'm making your favorite dinner. Pot roast, cornbread, collard greens. You're too skinny. Marcus laughed, the sound surprising him. You say that when I'm happy. When I'm sad. When I'm arrested for crimes I didn't commit. Because it's always true, Ruth replied, squeezing his hand. And because food is love, baby. And you need all the love we can give you right now. The SUV pulled out of the garage into afternoon sun. Marcus watched DC scroll past. Monuments to justice. Buildings full of people fighting for or against it. He'd been inside that machinery, felt its gears try to crush him, but he'd survived. And now, with his father and grandmother beside him, he'd helped remake those gears into something that protected instead of destroyed. The robotics competition was next month. Marcus had work to do. Designs to finish, code to debug, a team counting on him. After that, college. Then law school, maybe, or engineering. Both, possibly. He had time now. His future stretched ahead, wide and luminous, reclaimed from the darkness that almost swallowed it. As they turned onto Ruth Street, Marcus saw neighbors gathering on porches. Word had spread fast. They applauded as the SUV parked, shouting congratulations and prayers. Deshawn ran up, eyes wide. Marcus, you're home. I knew you didn't do it. I told everyone. Marcus climbed out and hugged the kid. Thanks for believing in me. Are you still going to teach coding? Deshawn asked. Because I got really good while you were gone. I want to show you. Yeah, Marcus said, smiling. I'm still going to teach. I'm not going anywhere. Jonathan and Ruth followed him up the steps. Inside, the house smelled like home. Coffee and old books and Ruth's cooking. Marcus's room was exactly as he'd left it. MIT posters still on the walls, circuit diagrams scattered across his desk. He sat on his bed, running his hands over the familiar quilt. His mother had made it years ago, each square a different color. He pressed his face into it, breathing deep. Behind him, Jonathan cleared his throat. Marcus, I need to say something. Marcus turned. His father stood in the doorway, still in his suit but tie loosened, looking more vulnerable than Marcus had ever seen him. I'm going to do better, Jonathan said quietly. Be home more. Be present. You needed me, and I was thousands of miles away building a career on principles I didn't apply to my own family. That changes now. You saved me, Dad. I almost lost you first, Jonathan's voice cracked. That's not good enough. You deserve better. Marcus stood and crossed to his father. They embraced, and this time Marcus felt something settle, not perfection, but possibility. The beginning of a different relationship, one built on presence instead of distance. We'll figure it out, Marcus said. Together. Jonathan nodded against his son's shoulder. Together. I promise. Downstairs, Ruth called them for dinner. They descended into warmth and laughter and the smell of pot roast. Around the table, for the first time in weeks, Marcus felt safe. The nightmare was over. The work ahead would be hard, testifying, advocating, fighting for the thousands still trapped in the machine. But tonight, he was home. He was free. He was loved, and that was enough to begin again. 6 months later, Marcus stood at a podium in the Kennedy Center, facing 2,000 people gathered for the Criminal Justice Reform Summit. His father sat in the front row beside Ruth, both watching with quiet pride. Deshawn was there too, grinning from the balcony. The lights were bright, but Marcus didn't squint. He'd learned to face brightness after so much darkness. My name is Marcus Reid, he began, voice steady. 6 months ago, I was sentenced to life in prison for a crime I didn't commit. I was 17 years old. I had a 4.2 GPA. Scholarship offers, dreams of changing the world. None of that mattered because I was a young black male wearing a dark hoodie 3 blocks from a crime scene. The audience was silent, leaning forward. Cameras tracked his every word. The detective who arrested me had falsified reports in dozens of cases. The prosecutor needed a conviction for her political campaign. The judge received donations from that prosecutor. And together, without conspiracy or coordination, just through systemic incentive structures, they destroyed my life. They would have succeeded if my father hadn't been the Attorney General. Marcus paused, letting that sink in. But what about the thousands of kids whose fathers are janitors? Mechanics? Unemployed? What about the ones whose mothers work 3 jobs and can't take time off for court appearances? What about those who trust the system, believe in justice, and still get buried alive by it? He looked directly at the camera. The system didn't fail me. The system worked exactly as designed. It prioritizes conviction rates over truth. It rewards aggressive policing over thoughtful investigation. It treats poor defendants differently than wealthy ones. And it grinds up black and brown children at rates that should horrify every American. His voice grew stronger. My father taught me to believe in justice. He was right. Justice is real, not as a system that exists now, but as an aspiration we must fight toward. Every case, every defendant, every child deserves what I received. A thorough investigation, aggressive defense, impartial judgment. Not because their father has power, but because justice should be everyone's inheritance, not a privilege. Marcus saw faces in the audience, some crying, some nodding, some angry. Good, anger was fuel. Since my case became public, 300 wrongful convictions have been overturned. Detective Corso is in federal prison. Prosecutor Warren was disbarred. Judge Harlan will never sit on a bench again. But that's not enough. The incentives that created them still exist. The machine that chewed me up is still running. He glanced at his father. Jonathan nodded, eyes glistening. So here's what I'm asking, Marcus continued. Don't just feel bad for me. Feel angry. Then turn that anger into action. Volunteer with public defenders. Donate to innocence projects. Vote for judges who prioritize justice over conviction rates. Demand accountability. Shine light into every dark corner of this system until there's nowhere left for corruption to hide. He gripped the podium, leaning forward. I'm studying engineering and law now. I'm going to build things, tools that make justice more accessible, systems that protect instead of destroy. But I can't do it alone. None of us can. Reform isn't a single case or a single victory. It's daily, unglamorous work by thousands of people refusing to accept that some lives matter less than others. Marcus straightened, looking across the sea of faces. My mother died when I was 8. She used to say, "You're stronger than you know." She was right. We're all stronger than we know, strong enough to demand better, strong enough to build better, strong enough to become the justice we want to see. He paused, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The system tried to kill me. It almost succeeded, but I'm still here. I'm still fighting. And I'm going to make sure no other kid has to call their father from a courthouse payphone begging to be saved from injustice. The audience rose in standing ovation. Marcus stepped back from the podium, overwhelmed. His father was there instantly, embracing him. Ruth joined them, the 3 holding each other while cameras flashed and people cheered. Later, outside under stars, Marcus stood with Deshawn, teaching him advanced Python coding. The kid was brilliant, hungry to learn. Behind them, the Kennedy Center glowed against the night sky. You're a hero, Deshawn said suddenly. Everyone says so. Marcus shook his head. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who survived something terrible and decided to make it mean something. That's what a hero is, Deshawn replied, wise beyond his years. Marcus smiled. Maybe the kid was right. Heroes weren't people without fear or pain. They were people who faced both and kept moving forward. His phone buzzed, text from Sandra Mills. You were incredible. Proud to have fought for you. Another from his robotics team. Competition next week. We're winning this for you. And one from his father. I love you. Your mother would be so proud. Marcus pocketed his phone and looked up at the stars. Somewhere he hoped his mother was watching. Somewhere he hoped she knew he'd survived. That he'd found his strength. The system had tried to break him. Instead, he'd broken through. And now, with every speech, every case, every kid he helped, he was remaking that system into something worthy of the justice it claimed to represent. Marcus Reid was 17 years old. He'd been sentenced to life, freed by truth and reborn through purpose. His life was just beginning, and he was going to make it count.